Welcome back to Heritage of Our Fathers. Today we will be talking about Oba Eweka II and the rebuilding of Benin. When Oba Eweka II was crowned in 1914, the kingdom he inherited was a wounded giant. The echoes of the 1897 invasion still haunted Benin. The once mighty palace stood broken, its carved pillars burned, its ivory treasures scattered in foreign museums. The sacred drums of state, silenced for nearly 2 decades, now beat again but faintly, like the weakened pulse of a patient recovering from grave injury. It was upon this fragile heartbeat that the new Oba built his reign. Eweka's sector was not a man of towering stature, but his presence carried the weight of his lineage. He bore the grief of a son who had seen his father. Ram when exiled and humiliated, yet his eyes carried a flame, an unyielding determination to restore dignity to Benin. His coronation had been supervised by British officers, his authority clipped by colonial rules. Yet in the hearts of his people, he was no mere chief as the British called him. He was the Oba, the living embodiment of Edo tradition. His first task was spiritual, to restore the broken connection between his people and their ancestors. The palace shrines had been desecrated, sacred altars destroyed or stolen. Priests whispered that the land itself was angry, that the spirits of past Obas wandered unsettled. Eweka summoned the Ohenokwahe, the high priests, and ordered new altars built. Ivory tusks were carved anew, chalk offerings returned, and blood sacrifices made to cleanse the soil. As the smoke of sacred fires rose into the sky, the people felt the kingdom's soul stirring again. But spiritual revival alone was not enough. The palace, the heart of Benin, lay in ruins. Where once stood sprawling courtyards and towering carved doors, only weeds grew. Eweka too walked those grounds barefoot, his coral beads glistening under the sun, and swore to rebuild. Craftsmen were called from every corner of Edo land. Blacksmiths brought iron tools, carvers sharpened their knives, brickmakers shaped the red clay of Benin into strong walls once more. Young men, their bodies glistening with sweat, hauled timber beams and hammered stakes into the earth. Women carried baskets of earth and water, singing ancestral songs to keep the workers' spirits alive. Under his guidance, the palace began to rise again, not in the vast magnificence of centuries past, but in resilient beauty. The carved wooden doors returned, adorned with figures of warriors, leopards, and spirits. Coral bead designs were woven into the architecture, reminders of the kingdom's wealth and tradition. Though British restrictions limited what could be rebuilt, every wall raised was an act of defiance, every carving a declaration: Benin lives. The arts too flourished once again. In workshops lit by oil lamps, bronze casters returned to their fires. They melted brass and bronze, shaping it into plaques, masks, and royal figures. The clang of hammers echoed through the night, blending with the chants of apprentices learning ancient secrets. Oba Eweka personally encouraged these craftsmen, often visiting their workshops, nodding in approval as they presented him with newly cast works. He told them, "They took our treasures, but they cannot take the hand that creates." Festivals returned to the city. The Ige festival, once interrupted by colonial rule, was celebrated with renewed vigor. Men tied red wrappers around their waists, their chests glistening with beads. Women, adorned in coral and ivory bracelets, danced through the streets, ululating with joy. The sacred masquerades leapt and spun, chalk-painted faces glowing under torchlight. Drums thundered through the night, summoning spirits, binding the people together. These festivals reminded the Edo people of who they were, descendants of kings, guardians of traditions that no foreign power could erase. Eweka was a king who walked carefully between two worlds. On one side, the British colonial officers watched him, treating him as a subordinate under their indirect rule. On the other, his people saw him as the true heart of their identity. He learned diplomacy, bowing when necessary to British authority, but never letting the dignity of his throne crumble. When they mocked the palace reconstruction as native display, he only smiled, knowing that every beam of wood raised was a victory for memory. Yet his reign was not without struggle. Taxes imposed by the British caused resentment, and Eweka often mediated between colonial officers and his suffering people. Famine struck in some years, and he opened the palace stores to feed the hungry. He became known as a compassionate king, one who carried not only the weight of his crown but also the burdens of his subject. By the mid-1920s, Benin's cultural life had fully awakened. The palace stood proudly again, though humbler than its predecessor. Shrines glowed with fresh offerings, festivals filled the nights with music, and artisans produced works that astonished even the British. The kingdom, once declared dead, breathed again. Toward the end of his reign, Oba Eweka would sit in his palace courtyard, listening to the drums. Children danced around him, their laughter mixing with the deep boom of ancestral rhythms. The elders bowed low, chanting Oba Kipi, and he would nod, his face solemn yet proud. He had not restored Benin to its full former glory, perhaps no one could after 1897, but he had given it back its soul. When he died in 1933, the people mourned deeply. They remembered him not as a ruler who wielded vast armies or commanded endless wealth, but as the Oba who rebuilt dignity from ruins, who revived the festivals, who restored the heartbeat of the land. His name entered songs carried by griots and priests, and his reign became a symbol of resilience. The palace walls he rebuilt still bore the marks of fire, but now they stood tall, living proof that the Kingdom of Benin could never be erased. And through his vision, the sacred truth endured. A kingdom may be wounded, but as long as the Oba sits upon his throne, Benin lives. With this, we have come to the end of this history. Thanks for watching. God bless. Peace.